Welcome back, everyone. This is the Big Blue Banter podcast, and we're here to break down game film on the New York Giants and meet that game film with analytics and the eye test. I'm Dan Schneier. I'm your co-host. I'm joined, as always, by Nick Turchin. And today, we're going to be breaking down days 2 and 3 of the NFL draft of the New York Giants. We're going to take a look back on the draft as an overall scope, and as usual, we're going to get to your questions. So let's jump right in with the Giants' first pick on day 2. And yes, the Giants hung with that pick, number 95 overall. They acquired via the Cleveland Browns the trade of Odell Beckham Jr. Many people thought the Giants would try to trade up on day 2. There was a lot of discussion about potentially trading up into the third round, earlier in the third round by fans. It never came to fruition. Dave Gettleman, after the draft class, said at times they considered trading up from that number 95 overall pick, but at least according to Gettleman, it was for the player that they ended up drafting, and that's O'Shane Ximines. And I don't know exactly how to pronounce his last name yet. It's either Ximines. We'll find out. The Giants call him the X-Man. That's his nickname. So I'm going to go with that for this podcast until I get a better pronunciation of his name. But when they were sitting on the board at number 95 overall, I could see them going in either of two directions, Nick. I did think that this was one of the spots where they would be meeting need with value, and that didn't happen throughout the entire draft class, and we'll get to that later, where the Giants did prioritize value over need in a lot of spots. But in this spot, I knew that there would have an opportunity to match need with value, and the two biggest needs at the time were edge rusher and offensive tackle. Just 10 picks after edge, Jalen Ferguson, who the Giants brought in for one private visit, multiple visits throughout the process, came off the board at number 85. And then when the Giants picked Ximines, or the X-Men, there were still offensive tackles, Yanni Gajus, who I like, out of West Virginia, and Bobby Evans, who I really like personally, out of Oklahoma. But they grabbed the X-Men anyway. So, Nick, what did you see on film from X-Men when you broke him down, and how can he help the Giants in year one and then moving forward?
Yeah, the X-Man, he's an interesting guy to watch at ODU, only a 10-year football program there, a young program down in Norfolk. He's 6'3", 253. So right away, the measurables guys are going to see that he's kind of in between as a defensive end or as the old school traditional outside linebacker. He's solid versus the run, sets a pretty solid edge. Basically, with good use of hands, that's really one of his best traits. He's got pretty violent hands pretty consistently. He played mostly six tech and wider down there, and they rarely varied their front, so he was always coming from the outside and always exclusively too from the left side, and taking on the right tackle. So on the most quarterbacks' front side, and just in general, I think the Giants took a pick here a little bit more based on production potential versus like perfect scheme fit per se, because he's a good power rusher. He's a good disruptor of the pocket. He's pretty athletic. He can get to pass deflections. He's pretty long. He plays long, although I don't believe his measurables are super long there. And what's interesting though is he wasn't asked to drop back into coverage a whole lot, and they didn't vary their coverages. But he has the athleticism. This gets into the projection game. His body movement skills certainly say that he could do that in his zone capacity in terms of dropping off, which I think is just good enough. It checks that box enough, but he's not like an animal like a Josh Allen who is spending 50% of his snaps dropping back. So kind of an interesting, he's much closer to a 4-3 traditional defensive end than you would think initially, maybe just by looking at his size. I think that he'll be able to jump in right away on sub package, on third or sub packages most downs now, but just on the downs and passing downs. I think against the Giants are going to run a 2-line D-line rotation. I think they're going to have Martin Moore in there on running downs, just because he's going to be a rookie. He's a little undersized. Where he is undersized, he's on his legs. His legs are a little skinny, and when he's asked to kind of play in the phone booth, his lower body strength definitely needs to improve with the weight room. I think it's with an NFL room. I think he's a really good pick. Overall, he gives you just enough of the athleticism that you need, but at the same time, his power rushing element will allow him to collapse pockets and will allow him to actually disrupt the quick game, and that is a big theme in this draft. Speed rushers and guys that get to the outside and can beat guys who are taking 5 and 7 step drops, and then guys like I would say the X-Man who kind of get there a little quicker. Maybe it's a little uglier, maybe it's a little messier, but he gets there.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, a lot of things you said there, Nick, because disrupting that quick game. It kind of seems like a theme for the Giants throughout most of their draft picks here. Even Dexter Lawrence, a guy who they think can push the pocket and disrupt the quick game in different ways that he may have not shown all the time on tape. As far as the X-Men goes, Nick, obviously it was in a lower conference of play at Old Dominion, but I mean, here's a guy who was super productive at the collegiate level. In 2018 alone, 12 sacks, 18 and a half tackles for loss, 33 sacks in career sacks and 43 starts. But, I always like to look beyond the sacks, Nick. I'm a big believer that quarterback pressures are a much better indicator than sacks. And from that standpoint, according to Pro Football Focus, at least, he had a ridiculously high 23.5% pass rush win rate per their metrics, and that was last season. He had 55 quarterback pressures, hurries, hits, and sack combined in one season last year in 2018. So, this is somebody who I believe, just like you do, can impact the game as a situational pass rusher on obvious passing downs. Now, you talk about sub package, and I think, like you said, there'll be different sub packages for different players because obviously, as we've talked about here on the podcast, Nick, plenty of times, and as most people know who follow along for this podcast, based on kind of the demographic that listens to this, sub package is basically base package now in the NFL. So, there will be more situations, different kinds of sub packages that he may not be in on right away, the X-Man, but I think he's just the exact kind of guy you're looking for to give you that quick bolster in your pass rush game. And I really like what you said about his ability to win early. And that's something the Giants mentioned. They mentioned not only the hand usage, but that he has counter moves, and that's big for a rookie who, may otherwise struggle. But, one thing to keep an eye on that Nick mentions, that I'm keeping an eye on at least, is what kind of position the Giants will be in, I guess I would say, when he's on the field from a run defense standpoint. Like you said, he doesn't always win in phone booths, has kind of skinnier legs, and we'll see if that's something that teams can pick on, because that would be one way that I think I wouldn't say he'll struggle to get on the field, but it could be something that kind of gives the Giants pause playing him more snaps than not, and him emerging in a bigger role. I see somewhere along the lines of the role Lorenzo Carter had last season, Nick. Situational pass rusher, somebody who plays a little more towards the end of the season, but time will tell. And I think they did a good job with that pick as well. Moving on to the next pick, we're talking about Julian Love, their 4th round draft pick, first pick of day 3. Still a lot of talent on the board at the time they took him. So it shows you how much they liked him. And not only a lot of talent, Nick, but a lot of talent at positions they hadn't already addressed. So that shows you how much they like him. It's widely been discussed as their best value pick of this draft, Nick. I mean, he was top 50 on Josh Norris's big board. NBC Sports guy I really like, Roto World. PFF had him in that same range, and then he earned a 2nd round grade from Lance Zierlein, the NFL.com scout. I'm saying to you, Nick, should we believe the hype on Love after you took a look at him, or where should we stand here?
Yeah, I did a pretty good deep dive on the Notre Dame pass defense from 2016. I didn't realize they had like 3 meters, and particularly Love's and been in a lot of different systems. And in 17, they were mostly a quarter system where he played a lot of off coverage, and most recently in 2018 with Clark Lee, he was used more frequently all over the place. And actually, he played a little bit inside. He played press man. He played press bail. In all of these quote unquote systems, playing to the boundary. So he's playing to the short side of the field. And usually that means that corner can match up in man better or best against the lone X wide receiver, usually the guy on the other side of the field who can win in man the best. That usually doesn't happen in the NFL, obviously because of hashes, but that's just something to kind of keep in mind. I think he fell for reasons that guys are talking about, just limitations from speed as well as overall, I would say, play strength too, because he is sub 200 pounds. And he is 5'11", so the length issue is basically going to be a limitation against longer receivers. But definitely, he's like those guys. He's one of those guys that not one trait stands out a lot about him, but he kind of everything. The one area of weakness that I have, or let's start with what he can do. He's very competitive at the catch point. He's a very competitive guy in general. Frequently, he can respond very well with good tackling. When he's asked to, if it goes by and he's not asked to make a play, he did miss some tackles. And that's, I think, another reason why he may have fallen, because if there's a little bit of inconsistency in his game there, despite being a 2.5-year starter. But when he is asked to tackle a lot, like in the USC game, he's like really good. And so streak there, a lot of guys were asking or kind of looking like, hey, is he going to bump down in the slot because of that jackknife-like ability? I don't really see the problem with the slot or playing nickel corner for the Giants is that the way Betcher does it, this is what Grant Haley played last year, and this nickelback position always plays to the wide side of the field. So immediately you'd be putting a rookie in a position where he really didn't play a whole lot. Last year when he played in to the field, when he had nickelback position, he blitzed. And to be honest, he blitzed pretty well. We'll get to that in a second. So I don't really see like an immediate, like, hey, he'll compete for the slot corner position. I actually don't think that. Maybe against some speedier wide receivers he may, but I do see a position for him in sub package on passing downs where if you have a starter like Sam Beal and you Sam Beal's length against an inside slot receiver with length, they'll bump Beal inside and put him outside. Teams actually do that a fair amount in the league, but people don't kind of notice that the outside corner can actually move in. So that's where I think he can. I think he compete for that type of role right away. I think longer term, I think you see some traits that are applicable to the safety position. And it gets into a deeper conversation with how Betcher and the Giants view the safety position, which is not traditionally how other teams view the safety position, where he right now in terms of development, he's a little close to Curtis Riley in terms of his ability to play and pedal and to plant and drive. Like Riley wasn't great. He's not that great doing it either, but I think the Giants value other parts of his game, like his ability to blitz, which he looks like a natural blitzer. On the very few times that he's asked to do it, he's got active hands. He drives the quarterback well. I think that's what the Giants are targeting in terms of the way of where they would see him longer term is just that guy that they can have on the line of scrimmage that can play in space just enough, but he can be that third down wild card where, hey, he could be a corner, he could be down around the line of scrimmage, and he can maybe play off. So I see it. I like the pick overall. I'm not as, like I said, I'm not as jacked up on any of his individual traits, but longer term, I think he's going to be a good study to see how it goes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Nick, when you mentioned the potential fit long term at safety, because that's something that General Manager Dave Gettleman mentioned in an interview with SiriusXM earlier this week. So it's something to keep an eye on. And I really like what Daniel Jeremiah said, and he compared him to Desmond King, Los Angeles Chargers cornerback. Here's a defensive back who slipped in the draft, I think all the way to round 5, in large part just due to the metrics. And, the Giants have made it clear that they're going to stress and moving forward, they're going to really rely on on-field production more and character. And, everything I've read about Love from a character standpoint is this guy's going to add a really, really good presence to the Giants locker room on the defensive side of the ball. And whether that comes at the nickel position or not, I know that's where we originally people thought that was kind of a lock for him. But now that people are kind of backing off that now, I think either way, he's going to find a role on this defense one way or another. He's going to be a big part of this defense, and it's a pick I really like, Nick. But moving forward, obviously, Nick is one of the hardest workers in this business when it comes to the Giants, in my opinion, because I've tried to look through film myself, and I've done a lot on these quarterbacks, and I know how much time it can take, and he puts even more effort into it than anyone I know. In this regard. So obviously he didn't get a chance to get to every single day 3 draft pick. We're still going to touch on every single one of them. And I wanted to get your thoughts just from your initial, and I know you told me off air you want to do a little bit more work on pretty much all of the remaining picks that we'll go over, except with the exception of Darius Slayton, who we'll obviously touch on. But going in order of the draft picks, I do want to still touch on all of them. So from what you've seen so far, Nick, what do you think of Ryan Connolly, the linebacker they drafted out of Wisconsin?
Yeah, Connolly is he's an interesting guy. I initially looked at him and said, hey, he's got to be one of those guys that can cover as an inside backer. And as that kind of for the potential money backer role, and he'll be a special teamer, which I definitely think he will be in this defense or in this special teams unit. But overall, he's actually more of a kind of a strong side more of a traditional linebacker playing downhill. A buddy of mine actually in the scouting academy gave me some quick notes because, like I said, I haven't really gotten a chance to study that in depth. But my buddy really liked his FBI and his ability to diagnose things quickly within the run game. He's got a good first step. He can shoot gaps pretty well. So you're talking about, you're basically leaning towards a guy that can move on the strong side and can maybe play on early downs. Doesn't have tremendous short area bursts. He lacks power at the point of attack to take on blockers, but that's kind of like every other Giants linebacker, to be honest. The lateral mobility is okay. It's not a great sideline to sideline. type guy, and he's not really like one of those ex safeties that's going to be there. So my initial take as I'm kind of going in, I don't like to take too much input from someone else before you go into study, but that's why I kind of backburnered him a little bit, is that he sounded honestly a little bit more like Nate Stupar than a money backer. And that doesn't mean that that's bad, because what's cool about that is the Giants are absolutely prioritizing special teams, and that showed in the numbers last year. And I think it's a big part of what they want to do going forward. So if you're going to take a pick in the 5th round for a guy like that, I like it. And if he can work a few snaps in as a backup, and he's going to be potentially as an early down guy, I think all the better. But, I think that the more you go out in these picks and you kind of go out more towards the skill side, you're going to be kind of wasting your pick. This is, to me, more of like a potential single, and a guy where you kind of understand who he is. And he seems like a pretty moderate floor guy, and you can wrap your head around that pretty easily.
Yeah, it's interesting, Nick, because obviously, as most who know who listen to this podcast, I went to Wisconsin. That was where I graduated from. And obviously I'm a huge Wisconsin Badger fan. And when the pick was made, my dad texted me, why not Van Ginkel? Because, when you watch Wisconsin's defense, Van Ginkel definitely flashed. And he was drafted, I believe, a few picks later, maybe one round later. I think he was also drafted in the 5th round, but by another team. And he flashed a little bit more than Connolly. But, when I look back on this draft class, and I've started to read a little bit more about Connolly, because, listen, when I watch Wisconsin Badgers, it's not like when I'm watching the New York Giants. I'm not looking for the same things at all. I'm not focusing on the same things. I don't have time each week to dive into reading about each game recap and each player. And I don't have, the Big Blue Banter podcast for Wisconsin to listen to the film breakdown of those guys. So it's really not the same, and I don't have the same kind of insight. But I did think that Austin Gale of Pro Football Focus did a really, really interesting piece on Connolly, who, by the way, Nick, had much better kind of testing times than you would think, in my opinion. Sure, the 4.66 40-yard dash isn't anything crazy, but he did have a really, really, really impressive numbers in the drills that I really focus on myself, the 3-cone and the short shuttle, and the 10-yard, and when it comes to the 10-yard split. And this is actually the latter of which Austin Gale, obviously Pro Football Focus, did a really excellent job breaking down. So first of all, some interesting notes, and obviously, everybody take this with how they will when it comes to Pro Football Focus grades. I know some people don't agree with them. Some people like them. Whatever it is, I'm going to throw them out there anyway. I do believe they have some value, some intrinsic value. And from Pro Football Focus's Austin Gale, Connolly had a top 15 pass rushing grade among linebackers, and he actually finished with a better overall grade, according to them at least, than Devin Bush, which obviously, it is what it is. But he had a 1.54 second 10-yard split, and that was actually the 3rd best 10-yard split, Nick, of any off-ball linebacker since 2010 NFL Combine. So that to me is really interesting, and that's really what Austin kind of evaluated and really pinpointed in his evaluation. For them, they call it VHS, and that's just what they refer to as vision head start. And basically, the idea of why they like Connolly so much is that he has really good football instincts, and he trusts his instincts, and he goes with the play. And he says it shows up with that 10-yard split. It shows up on film as well, and just with his aggression and kind of burst to the tackle point. And I think Connolly's an interesting prospect for that reason, but I also think he's an interesting prospect because of kind of his journey, Nick. He went from an unrecruited, walk-on player, and now all the way to all honorable Big Ten mention last season. Racked up a ton of counting stats when it comes to tackles, sacks, 11 tackles for loss, and interception. And he only had 6 starts that was in 2017. Then in 2018, when he got the full-time gig, 89 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble. So he's a player who I think could potentially be a little more than a special teamer, Nick, just because I think the Giants saw something they liked there when it comes to just his vision, his instincts, his short area burst, and just with regards to where they would place him in that scheme. Kind of seeing him as more of what they originally thought they could have out of BJ Goodson just in that run game, but just a different style, because obviously he doesn't have that size, and he's not your traditional, take on the blocker linebacker. He's kind of more of a get there first type of player. So we'll see if it can work at the NFL level. Obviously, from what you've seen, Nick, you think he could be more of a special teamer, and you even said, you're going to have to do more work on him first to get a full review. But I am actually
but Dan, what's interesting though, you kind of hit the nail on the head just to really sink it for fans. When my buddy's saying he has a good first step, that's film speak for exactly what you synthesize with good vision and instincts, and an ability to translate that into actual a measurable, which they look at the 10-yard split. So that's a huge point that I didn't know about, and I don't think anyone really knows about. And why I bring it up, because it's a really interesting contrast. For those that study linebackers in this group, some people may say, like, hey, like, what does that mean for, like, is that like a White? And then I bring Devin White up to mind, because Devin White has a very, very good first, or a very fast first step,
right.
But he triggers to anything and you can't even see where he's going. And he ends up usually oftentimes not going to the right position. Guys like this that can sync the ability to understand what's going on in front of them and have the processing speed to actually put that in action. When you couple that with the measurable that he can do it fast anyway, that's when you have a football player. And yeah, I really like that. That's a really cool part where it's like, yeah, can he hang? When you draft someone in the 4th or 5th round, you're trying to find something he can hang his hat on. If he can hang his hat on that, he can play on early downs and in a backup capacity. That's huge. Most guys fail in the 4th or 5th round because they can't find that. So yeah, no, that's very, very cool. And to be honest, I don't like to get a ton of it before film, but I'll definitely focus on that for sure.
Yeah, take a look at that, because I think you really just hit it on the nail on the head there too, Nick. If there's just a niche role for him, like we said, it doesn't have to be this starting 3-down linebacker. You find a niche role for him. You find the downs where he can help your team in a certain way, and you put him there. And then when you talk about kind of the backdrop of the special teams for production at Wisconsin and kind of how they project him moving forward, because I know they are excited about what he can do from that standpoint, then you have your fallback. And then, like you said, you're not burning these picks on skill position freaks. But at the same time, that actually leads me into transition very nicely to the next pick. And that's Darius Slayton. And Nick, I will say this, while I do like what we just discussed with Ryan Connolly, when I'm drafting wide receivers, if I'm drafting wide receivers, and if I was a GM, Nick, I've made this clear, I'm only pretty much be drafting wide receivers in the later rounds, and then I'd be doing what the Patriots do, trading for veterans that you need. That's pretty much would be my strategy. Don't burn any early assets at the position. But when I'm doing it, Nick, I'm looking for talent that I think could have been A, misutilized at the collegiate level because of B, basically the scheme there, or the quarterback play there, or how he was used within the scheme. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm betting on talent. And at a legit 6'1", because he is lengthier and taller than you would even think when you watch him on film. I've started to watch a little bit of Darius Slayton, and I've been impressed. 6'1", 190 pounds, ran a 4.39 official with a 40-inch vertical, which is super impressive, a 135-inch broad jump, explosive. You watch him, you throw on the tape of that Purdue bowl game, and you see that second touchdown when he catches the screen in space and somehow finds a way to get the angle and outrun the safety, which he should have never been able to do. And you think, wow, this guy has some potential. So I want to know, Nick, can he become that ultimate knife in the defense over the top, that vertical burner that you and I have been talking about and you've been clamoring for this offense needs since basically week 1? I think I remember you saying this either week 1 or week 2 against Dallas, I believe it was, of the 2018 season. Is this a guy you think can do it?
Yeah, I think he's an interesting story, because a lot of guys are going to watch the 18 tape and they're going to look at Gus Malzahn and they're going to wonder why it's not more like 2017, where they threw the ball deep a lot more with all the same players involved, including the quarterback. And, Gus Malzahn's a great coach, and they've got the reasons for what they do for how they do things. And to be honest, it's not that different than Justin Herbert at Oregon and how people think he's quote unquote misused. Nevertheless, still see things within his tape. And, Slayton's interesting because you mentioned all the raw and the raw ability is there, but the guy's a 2-year starter and he's very raw, period, because his route running is very, very, very raw. Now, as a burner, to answer your question directly, yes. As a burner, can he be that guy for the Giants to take the top off the defenses? Yeah, I definitely think he can. I think that his development would be kind of interesting to watch. It's going to be a test for Tyke Tolbert, and I'm kind of hoping that he spends as much time with Latimer as humanly possible, because there is a little bit of overlap in how they do things. Like we said, the biggest thing that Slayton's got to work on at the NFL level, even if he's just going to be a burner, is his release. Overall, you saw some improvement in his senior year, but his junior year, his most productive year, it's literally only deep shots. He doesn't change the pace. When he comes off the line of scrimmage, he doesn't have a ton of skill, and press coverage really kind of eats him up. And this gets into the easiest way to shortcut all this is to look at the 2018 game where Auburn faced Georgia, and this previews the Giants' position battle. Actually, I guess we're getting this a little early, but previews the Giants position battle or practice battle that we'll see this year, where Slayton faced off against DeAndre Baker, and DeAndre Baker held him to 1 catch for 8 yards. And of course, just look at the stats there. Looking at the tape, there's a lot of examples for both that show both Slayton's upside and downside, as well as even too for Baker, his upside and downside. So what was interesting in this game specifically to see is that Slayton showed that he can vary his release a little bit. He can give you better use of hands at the line of scrimmage. He can beat press coverage in some cases, not consistently, but a few cases. And so the potential's there, the capability's there. And people would say, okay, well, who gives a shit? Like, if he's going to be a deep burner, isn't that what we want? And it's like, that's correct, but you want to be able to at least move him around the formation enough, and you don't want to have the defense be able to dictate to you via press or whatever it is or what have you, or collision after the line of scrimmage, that this guy is rendered useless. So these things I think are going to be critical, because even if he doesn't improve his ball catching skills, that is something he's got to get there too. He's not a ball hawk, and that's why I hope he spends a lot of time with Cody Latimer. Ball tracking is pretty that he can, I think he can become potentially, I think his upside is Cody Latimer if he gains weight, and if he gets better at if his route running improved that much. It just has to get off past press coverage. I like the pick overall, but I'm not as juiced as I thought I would be. I think he's going to give Corey Coleman a run for the money. I think it's going to be interesting to see who's going to get more reps. And it's going to be a good competition. I think that, and like I said, the biggest points for him is, can he get from 0 to 8 yards at a good speed? Because his third or fourth stride is where his speed hits really quickly.
Yeah.
It's not in his burst. It's not in his initial get off. So he's got to get that. He's got to get runway set up. And then I think he could be dangerous. Even if he doesn't catch the ball, it's just that first 0 to 8 yards.
I think you said it best, Nick. And while I do think that his progression within this Giants team and on this roster could take a little longer, I'm not sure he's going to compete right away because of a lot of the reasons you said. He's still very raw in a lot of ways, as like you said, initial get off the line of scrimmage, beating press coverage. Because if you're not going to be able to beat press coverage in the NFL level, he's just not going to be on the field any snap. I think we would both agree with that. And while all that is true, I do think that I can see what you're saying in Latimer. And again, I've only just started watching Slayton. I'm still trying to work my way through all the content I do on a daily basis, and then get myself at nights to watch more Giants film. And a lot of it has been focused on Daniel Jones right now, so I plan on doing some stuff there starting either late this week or next week. But as far as Slayton, who's really the second guy I've had a chance to get to, I think that while I do see the Latimer comparison, I think that from what I've seen, Nick, there is more post-catch explosion. And you kind of said it best. It's not in the initial burst. It's kind of in more of the Evan Ingram way, that second gear that you talk about, that you've talked about in the past, and I've seen with Slayton. And I think that that's what the Giants see. In addition to him kind of being that knife, they also see, like, listen, our offense is just going to be all post-catch. That's what we want. That's the offense they're trying to build here, guys. They're building a run-first offense, play-action post-catch. Get rid of the ball quick. Daniel Jones is going to have to get rid of it quick to the right read and take his shots occasionally. And most of it's going to be what these guys do after the catch. And that's kind of where I got excited about Slayton, Nick. And I know there's not too many examples because, again, the production wasn't there at Auburn, especially in 2018 as much. So, but I do think from what I've seen there, just there's a lot more to like post-catch with him than I originally thought. And that's really what has me excited, Nick. But obviously the Giants had 3 more draft picks. They had 10 draft picks in this class. It is impressive. They had 12 picks, and they traded couple more, and they got 10. And they stuck on their board, which I didn't expect them to do. I really thought they would end this draft with like 8 picks, but they did. And so obviously, like we touched on earlier, Nick hasn't had a chance to get to these last 3 picks. But we are going to touch on them a little bit briefly, and we'll start with Corey Ballentine. Obviously, Ballentine has made the news in recent days for a really, really sad, unfortunate event. The night of him celebrating being drafted to the Giants, him and his best friend and his teammate and his roommate, Dwayne Simmons, went to a party that literally, and had no idea, nothing to do with what was going to happen later. There was no indication. And unfortunately, this party was nearby, a couple blocks away from, a bad timing, senseless act where there was gun violence and his roommate was killed. He was shot and got very lucky that he was shot in the glute in a position where, he's already made a full recovery, at least according to what we've read recently. He's going to be at the Giants rookie minicamp this week on Friday. It starts. It's a 2-day minicamp that'll run May 3rd through May 4th. As far as his participation goes, I wouldn't expect him to participate. I don't see any reason the Giants are going to rush him through this. It's a mini camp. It's not going to, training camp is what they're gearing up for Valentine. But as far as the pick goes, Nick, I really like this pick because for me, I'm just a big believer when you get to this point of the draft where if you could get a guy, you're at pick. What was Valentine? Was he 180 or was he in the two? Yeah, he was pick 180. When you're at pick 180, if you can get a guy on your board, you may have a pick number in the 100 or 125 range overall. I believe it's possible they had that with Valentine. I mean, aside from the fact that he played at Washburn, there's really a lot to like about his pro projection. He ran a 4.47 40-yard dash at 200 pounds, which is really impressive to me. 39.5-inch vertical, 135-inch broad jump. And that's, we don't go only by that, but that's just to say, here's a guy who at least has the athleticism, Nick, to translate, because that's something you definitely have to look for when you're playing at Washburn. With a much smaller school, but he also had really good 3-cone, 6.82 time and a short shuttle 4.14. So it shows he also has that quickness that you want from a cornerback, especially depending on where you're going to play him, either on the boundary or on the inside. And then we'll get to that a little bit later, but there's also been some talk of maybe him moving to safety eventually, or at some point even sooner than that, because he has had some experience playing safety at Washburn. But you're also talking about a player who, from what I've read, he was really, really impressive at the Senior Bowl. And obviously the Giants are big Senior Bowl guys. They go down there, they scout these guys, and they put a lot of weight on it, at least from what we've seen in the first two draft classes. And he came in and he competed with those top senior wide receivers. Deebo Samuel was there, McLaurin was there, Doss was there. There's some good receivers in that game. I don't know exactly what side of the ball they were playing on, so don't quote me if they were on his team. My bad. But he played against some good receivers and he held his own, and he ended up starting that game, earning the starting role based on what the coaches saw from him in practice. So I think Valentine to me was actually one of my favorite picks because it showed that the Giants are going to be okay with going with value and loading up on a position like cornerback. And now where the upside now becomes ridiculously high, in my opinion, Nick, because listen, if they land two of these three, let's throw Beal in here too from last year's draft class. I'm going to call him part of this class just for this experiment. If let's say three of those four guys hit as not necessarily elite players, but starters, they've now rebuilt the secondary with those four guys or with three of those four guys. And what that will allow them to do is have a super low overall salary cap hit at that cornerback position with talent, with youth, with the potential for growth. And this would be moving forward, in 2020, 2021, which are going to be the big Daniel Jones years. I believe, obviously, he's going to be the starter next season. We'll see if I'm wrong about that, but I would be shocked. And that's kind of that range you want to hit with those rookie quarterbacks based on the rookie quarterback scale. But if they're not paying the cornerback position and they're not paying the safety position with Peppers under contract cheap, and they're not paying the quarterback position and they're still not paying the running back position, that's when the Giants can get really, really aggressive. Finding an offensive tackle next free agency or finding a big edge rusher at outside linebacker next free agency, a big guy they believe can play money back who's also really talented. That's when they can start to do stuff like that. So I was a fan of the pick, Nick. Do you have any early thoughts on the Valentine pick?
No, and the only other thing, I was at the Senior Bowl and did not see him and missed day 3. And looking at everyone else's notes, that's when the day when he shined. So wish I was there for day 3. Like you said, that good on good is a big deal for the seniors and many teams. It has to do more at the drills than it does the game. That's pretty cool. Wish I was there. Wish I had more to say. Not going to lie.
Well, that's the good thing, Nick. We still have a really, really long offseason to go before we roll into training camp. So we're going to have time to take a look at all these guys. We're going to have a lot more on these players as we move forward. But as we move on to their next draft pick, the 7th-round draft pick, bit of a surprise to a lot of people that this was the first time they drafted a player at his position, but they finally went to the offensive line and drafted George Asafo-Ajayi, Nick. And this is a player who I have a little insight into just because I'm really good friends with Josh Edwards, who covers the Cleveland Browns for 24/7 Sports, but he also covers Kentucky football, kind of does like a dual job. And the minute he was drafted, he told me I'm going to like this guy. Now, according to Josh, in his opinion, he's going to be much better suited for the interior offensive line at guard at the NFL level. I don't think that's what the Giants view him as, because just based on Gettleman's comments, it seems like they view him as a tackle. Gettleman said they had a 5th-round grade on him. They got him in the 7th. And they believe he could play tackle at the NFL level. We'll see. That remains to be seen. But there are examples of him for sure holding his own and looking the part at the NFL level. He's got base. I think he's one of those power players that, and when the Giants passed Nick on Andre Dillard at number 17 overall, take Dexter Lawrence, a lot of people were surprised at that decision. And, you could throw Cody Ford into the mix there, I guess, or Dalton Risner if you believe that he was there. And obviously Juwan Taylor dropped because of some medical concerns. But I think what the Giants really indicated to me by passing on Dillard, who to me was the best offensive tackle at that point, and in my opinion, the best player overall in the draft at that point, was that they don't see a fit for him right now at that right tackle position. And then it's just too much of a long term. You're using the 17th overall pick on a player like Dillard. He has to play right away. And what they want, I think, is a player like Asafo Ajayi at that right tackle position, more of the old Kareem McKenzie anchor for this run-based offense that's going to go through Barkley. But I'm not so sure he's going to get there. Like I said, I've been told by the Kentucky kid that he's better suited for the interior offensive line. Time will tell. I think he'll have a chance to compete at tackle right away. But is there anything you've picked up on Asafo Ajayi since you started reading into him and looking into the process that's intrigued you, Nick?
The best thing, the base there, one of the bigger things in the old school sense of will he kick down and move down inside is definitely the arm length. Now, the measurables are not always the story. He does have shorter arms. That's why guys are saying he's going to move in. The question is, how does he use those arms? Basically, Andre Dillard's arms are the same size, if not bigger, than Jonah Williams. I believe that's what everyone's been saying, and I cannot recall if that's exactly true, but I'm pretty sure it is true. So it's how you use the arms and how they engage. And one thing that I think that's not really his thing, from what the little that I've read on him in terms of his use of hands. And so it kind of gets into is a play style that's a little closer to what I'm just envisioning, what Will Hernandez does, where Hernandez's first strike and his ability to kind of get to someone is not really there. Once you get inside on Hernandez or he gets inside on you, you're dead. So his style is going to be a little closer. Yeah, I do see him going down more. But yeah, definitely try out for the position. And the one thing I think he kind of like is that, he is a little bit of a sense. He's only 303 pounds too, right? So, my initial takeaways are it's kind of like he would be right on the fence for guard or tackle, and we'll see what the tape shows. And in general, I think that's kind of it. I think that, yeah, you get that type of, if you have a guy in the fifth, if you have a guy that you grade as a fifth rounder and you get him where you get him, I think you kind of pull that trigger just and see if you can make the team.
Yeah, and even if they pull that trigger knowing maybe he'll be an interior guard for them later on, it still could be a good value pick because, again, they have Pulley who's going to kind of operate as that backup center, and maybe he can slide in at guard if they need him to. But they're going to need competition like we've always talked about, Nick, on the interior offensive line, on anywhere on the offensive line during the entire, every season, every year, keep on doing it. Last round pick, Chris Slayton out of Syracuse. I can't say I know too much about him. He's 6'4", 300. From what I've read, he's basically what you would consider the picturesque three technique, I guess is the best way to describe it. Not saying he's the perfect three technique in this draft class or anything like that, but that's his position, that's his role. And so maybe the Giants, are just looking for a guy who can be a gap shooter at that position. Obviously, they found something with Dexter Lawrence that they like, but they're very different prospects, I believe, Slayton and Lawrence, obviously based on their size, their frame. And production-wise, nothing too special from him out of Syracuse, but he did start a lot of games. And in 2018, he started all 13. He had 24 tackles, 8 for loss, 3.5 sacks, a forced fumble. So it's not, nothing to, cough at there. But I think for me, Nick, just based on where this roster is, they signed they drafted RJ McIntosh last year, and I think he'll definitely have a chance to compete. And I think they probably had a higher grade on McIntosh than they do on Slayton, Nick. And then they also brought in I'm blanking on his name now, from the Cardinals, the interior defensive lineman. They signed an old Betcher guy from 2017. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his guys, but Nick, do you remember who I'm talking about? Who they signed? Olsen Pierre, I believe.
Yeah.
So they brought him in. He's going to compete. They didn't just sign him for nothing. There's a lot of competition on the defensive line and probably limited spots because they're going to have to keep a lot more linebackers the way they run this defense too. So I think he's more of a camp body and more of somebody who I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't make the roster, quite honestly. But is there anything you've seen from the little you've looked into him so far, Nick?
No, not additionally. I think that's kind of the right way to look at it is obviously Gettleman bias toward he likes to get on the interior line and you get him in competition and you see if they can see how it shapes up. And it's tough because, a lot of times you may have the FA that you're going to grade higher than your seventh rounder, but the pick gets picked because of certain reasons, whether it's, because the scout really wants to make a bet on him or whatever it is. So, I'm not really sure. I just think that the more competitive guys they can get at each position group, that's huge to turn the entire team around for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, let's move on, Nick, to some, before we get to everybody's questions today, let's look at just kind of, I wanted to break down a little general review of this draft and just maybe some questions that we might have looking back. So for me, Nick, I think the biggest question I'd have out of this draft class is looking back. I wonder if they might look back at this class, Nick, and regret not getting one of those talented top tier offensive tackles. I know after the draft, Dave Gettleman said, listen, the value at the offensive tackle position for us on our board was wiped out after the 4th round. And I don't blame him. I mean, I thought it was completely wiped out as well by that point. And I wasn't surprised when they stopped with those late round picks when they didn't use it there. But at the same time, they did have an opportunity to get 2 players I thought were really, good values at the time they were drafted by 2 really good drafting teams. Bobby Evans, the guy I talked about on this podcast before, that I've talked about on Twitter, the guy at Oklahoma, opposite of Cody Ford. I thought he was a really good player. Thought he could have been a nice find for the Giants. He went to the Rams, I believe it was, a few picks after the X-Man, but just before Julian Love. And then you had Yadi Kajust go to the Patriots. Both these guys, Evans and Kajust, were compensatory 3rd round draft picks right after the Giants picked the X-Men with that Browns pick. And I don't think that they made a wrong decision getting the X-Men, because you like him, Nick. I like him. There's a lot of people who like him, I bet, in that Giants building. And I think they needed him. But I think that this was a spot in the draft, a little bit of a sweet spot, Nick, where I think they could have packaged some of those later picks. Maybe you don't end up with a Ryan Connolly. Maybe you don't end up with a Darius Slayton. But you do end up then by trading up into that spot, into one of those spots before the Patriots or the Rams, with one of these offensive tackles that you can feel a little bit more confident about than a Sopowith guy. Because now you look back, Nick, at these last 2 drafts, Gettleman's first 2 draft classes, and while I am impressed, that he has shown that he wants to improve this offensive line, be it at least overall, because he did bring in Kevin Zeitler via trade, love that move. He did sign Nate Solder, a player who I'm much higher on than, Giants fans on Twitter. I thought that was a good move. I think it's really hard to find left tackles, and he does a good job there. But now it's 2 draft classes, Nick, and they've only used the 2nd and the 7th round draft pick on the offensive line. So I wonder, looking back, because I did really like the top of this class at the offensive tackle position. I thought it went about 10 deep, 10, 12 picks deep, 10, 12 prospects deep. If that'll be a mistake, where do you stand on that, Nick?
On the tackles, or just with the question would?
I guess you can answer both parts on the tackles for this class, and then just in general, just drafting 2 linemen with a 2nd and 7th round pick in 2 draft classes.
Yeah, I didn't study the tackles that closely this year, so it's hard to say if they missed on values from my perspective. But knowing me, I'm like way too in depth versus just a broad range of what they should be doing. In general, I think that the whole question around right tackle goes into whether or not you're going to take an approach of signing guys in free agency, come to the draft, you don't get more. I know Gelman doesn't care about the questions, but you don't feel the need to draft a right tackle, because I think it is like kind of the most important position on the defensive line in a lot of ways, just because of the amount of guys that line up on that side in terms of pass rushers in the division, and then as well because if you're gonna have Eli Manning, he needs his front side, his right side, to be protected. He does not deal well with that pressure. He's not a quarterback that's going to take care of that for you and move, basically come off his spot. So I think it's paramount, but I think it more is a free agency question than it is a draft. It's the way I see the draft in terms of how you want to take talent. So yeah, in 2 years, I think that they're not that they would sign a free agent and guy. So I'm a little surprised. My bigger questions, though, on the offensive side, I just have 2, and it's really interesting or really weird. People are going to go, why would you think this way? But the Giants obviously want to run a balanced attack. That's what Pat Shermer wants to run a lot. He wants to run pretty much as he's passing, at least sort of close to that. And the quant guys can go crazy over that statement. But what's interesting, I don't think the running back depth is there yet. I think Saquon is really good, and I think year over year, absolutely they improved the running back position by drafting arguably the best player in that draft. But I think it's funny because God forbid he gets injured or he is not on the field. I don't think they have guys they don't have a plethora of guys that can come right in and help support the offense in that case. And that's not really saying anything, But I think if you're going to value him as high as you're going to value a quarterback in that class, you got to have a guy that can at least play not give you a little more support. So I'm surprised they didn't go after someone more on the UDFA or on the running back side late in the draft, because there were a ton of running backs. I mean, there were so many running backs; it was out of control. So I was a little surprised there, and just not surprised just because of that one individual thing. Because, like we said, running backs are devalued in this day and age. But more so, is running the ball really a foundational part of their offense? I guess is really my question. And I know it is, because that's what the tape says, but I don't know if it is going forward, because you look at that RB3 spot, there's not really anyone there. On the defensive side, just really quick, a little surprised, just like you were, that they didn't put together a package to get more picks in the fourth or third round. Watching the Notre Dame tape, the guy who keeps on jumping out at me is Drew Tranquil. And then you listen to the guy getting interviewed, it's like, I mean, he's a leader of men. And I'm just surprised, because that would have been someone who is kind of that in-between hybrid. He's overlooked in a lot of ways, but also he can cover tight ends a little bit. And this gets in a whole conversation about their defensive backs. Their defensive backfield has completely changed. And they have two new coaches. They lost their captain. They lost the one guy besides the captain who could line the defensive backfield up in Curtis Riley. And they basically have two undrafted free agents as basically the main guys, and Janoris Jenkins. So I'm surprised they didn't go for more of a leadership role for both the linebacker position / defensive backfield hybrid going forward. That was a weird thing for me, and I think Tranquil would have been the guy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you only have so many picks, but you do bring up some great points there, Nick, that I wanted to touch on before we dive down to that. And obviously I was actually thinking they would be interested in Coney, the other linebacker there, went undrafted, I believe, just too poor testing times. I don't think that NFL scouts and general managers believe he'll be able to translate to the NFL level. But as far as in the offensive side of the ball with the running back position, I think you make a good point, Nick, because this will be a run-first offense. And I think we talked somewhat about the right tackle position and how it applies to Eli Manning. But for me, this is Daniel Jones' offense now. I know Eli Manning is the starter for this season, but unless the Giants go on an unexpected playoff run, he's not going to finish the season as the starter, and he won't be back for 2020. So I'm really looking at this offense and how it could operate with Jones. And I know, Nick, you've done a lot on Jones. I've done a lot on Jones. I think the offense is going to change the way it looks with Jones because of his ability to move outside of the pocket and his running ability and just overall athleticism. I think it's going to change the way that the way they run this offense. So that's still to be seen. But at the running back position, you make a good point, because you look at the other foundational run-first teams, Nick, in the NFL. How about the Cowboys? How about the Rams? Well, what did they do? They have their Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott and Todd Gurley, and yet they still used a premium mid-round pick at the running back position. And even a team like the Buffalo Bills, who also, part of it is because LaShawn McCoy is getting older, but part of it is that they're they want to be a foundation run-based team, and they use a mid-round pick on a running back as well. And mid-round at this point for the running back is basically early round. When you consider how late running backs go, especially in this draft class, it was one of the, these were one of the first few running backs that came off the board, and they went on a run, and they went on a running back run in that part of the draft, that portion of the draft, because teams are like, all right, we don't want to lose these talent, we don't want to lose out on these guys. We're waiting kind of for the first domino to fall, and then it finally did. So it is a good point you bring up. I'm going to throw this out there, Nick, and I know I could get torched for this, but I was one of the biggest Paul Perkins truthers in the history of the world, heading into that 2017 season before he got injured. Still to this day, he's like top 10, top 15 all time in forced missed tackles per touch, according to Pro Football Focus, which to me is literally my favorite one of their advanced statistics as far as translating to the next level. You look at the top guys at that every year, and that's where you find your breakouts at the running back. You can force the defense to miss. It was a combination of forced missed tackles and yards after contact. When you have those two things rolling for you at the running back position, I believe. And now there are obviously a lot of traits that go into your ability to do that I'm not going to try to break down and discuss right now. But when you can do those two things, I think you're talented. So he is still on the roster, Nick. He was injured all of last season. And I wouldn't be totally surprised if he made a little bit of a push to make this roster in training camp. It wouldn't shock me. It will shock a lot of people when they see that first article or they see the first, positive buzz that comes out for Paul Perkins. People are going to be surprised. They've already turned the page on him. But keep an eye on him moving forward, because I do think he could be an interesting part of this team and make the roster out of camp. But moving on, for me, the biggest question on the other side of the ball, because I know we touched on both sides, is did the Giants do enough to improve their pass rush in this draft class? I think they're going to look for a different way, Nick, to get that pass rush in James Bettcher's team. And I think they believe that, a lot of the reason they weren't able to generate pressure last year is because they didn't trust BW Webb in coverage. They didn't trust Grant Haley in coverage when they were in sub package. They didn't trust these guys out there on an island to do, to hold up. And can you blame them? I mean, I can't blame them for not trusting BW Webb on an island. But now they're trying something new. They have DeAndre Baker on an island. They have Janoris Jenkins on an island. They might have Julian Love, Sam Beal on an island. And they might have improved pass coverage there with a guy like Dexter Lawrence in the middle and the X-Man on sub packages. I think they did enough to improve the pass rush, Nick. I know that's a controversial opinion based on, a lot of people just fire away at the Dexter Lawrence pick, just, assuming he's Damon Harrison, even though they don't profile at all athletically the same. What do you think, Nick? Do you think that they didn't do enough in this specific class to address the pass rush?
Great question. I'm on the fence. To your excellent point, though, let's dive into one aspect. Concrete example that they improved, or a concrete aspect of their pass rush that they did improve. If you fire up not just the Giants sacks, because as to Dan's point, sacks aren't really everything. Try to fire up if you can, the pressures and the hurries. Right. Most of the pressures and the hurries came off of either good motor from their defensive line, basically because of what you would call a coverage sack or a coverage pressure, or basically individuals beating, when B.J. Hill went on a couple of runs against interior offensive linemen and beats this guy one-on-one. The Giants, though, however, they stunted a lot. And to be frank, after watching like 50 snaps of like half of their stunts, they were almost terrible at it. Dexter Lawrence brings a different element there to their TE stunts because he can line up in that tech or position and then really threaten the tackle with both his length and his power to basically be the driver in a PE stunt. So what happens in the TE stunt is the tackle goes first, he's the driver, and then the end is the looper. Now, on top of that, let's just keep rolling here. They just drafted a guy who Dan mentioned had good speed, but also he doesn't have the X-Man doesn't have great first. He doesn't have a great first step, but he's got good counter moves, and one of his counter moves is with speed. I think, even though it's not in his college tape, I think his traits show that he would be a pretty good looper as an end. So if you throw the X-Man and you throw Lawrence together on the same side, preferably the left side for me of the defense, you have a different element than you had last year. If you look at the tape, last year was mostly Hill and Carter. Hill is very good as a pass rusher, but he's not the best driver in stunts. He doesn't occupy space as well. He's not it's not just occupy space like he's a blunt object. It's more like he has the length to get in the dudes in the tackle's face. And Carter, he's a little bit more of a boundary rusher. He's more of a guy that's going to win in isolation. He's not necessarily that guy that's going to be that. So anyway, I think that's the part of the draft that's not being talked about. That's maybe a little in the details, a little in the weeds, but I think you're going to see a big uptick there. I do think that they're. I don't know if they're going to need someone else, because as you've mentioned in a few times, their defense, the defensive profile, they're not going to blitz as much with man coverage behind it. They're going to blitz with a lot of match coverage behind it and a lot of simulated pressure, rushing four guys, but doing it from four different positions. That's where the hybrids apply. So I think this year is a test if their blitz pressure or packages can get in versus actually get home. And that may be what they live and die with, because now their secondary is better. To circle back all the way back to your answer, I think there's one element that they got much better at, but I think the rest is to be seen. And I'm excited and intrigued, not like, oh, it's to be seen because, it wasn't a great draft. I think, no, it's an interesting way to do it, and we'll see what happens. Yeah,
and you nailed it right on that. And you talk about, the importance of, and I think what you brought up here, Nick, is an awesome niche point that people who follow me on Twitter are probably going to hear from me a few more times because I loved it. As far as the tackle line stunts go, some of the Giants weren't able to do that. Now they might be able to. And you talk about the importance of length from one of the spots there from, before they had Tomlinson, Hill, all those different guys trying to do it. And Dexter Lawrence, as far as a length standpoint goes, Nick, is literally the perfect prospect, I think, for this niche role. You know what I mean? He had 88th percentile arm length, 97th percentile wingspan. He's 6'4" and 3/4, basically 6'5", 340 pounds. He's the perfect player, I think, for this role. And it's interesting you bring up that combo of him and the X-Man, because maybe if that's something they see too, Nick, that little niche for their defense, it's something that we could see probably sooner than people expect in the 2019 season.
Yeah, no, for sure. The measurables, the guy can jump too. That's what's crazy. It's like he's that big and he's athletic enough to time the snap. Love it.
Yeah, me too. Moving on, we'll touch on the UDFAs when they become official, the Giants undrafted free agents. There's some talk about who they've signed, who they haven't, tryouts and whatnot. But we're going to do that on a further podcast when we have time to look into them more and when they become official. But I will say keep an eye on C.J. Conrad, the Kentucky tight end, and only because the man I mentioned before, Josh Edwards from 24/7 Sports, he had a pretty solid review for Asafo Ajayi, the 7th-round offensive lineman, but he had a glowing review for Conrad. And Conrad's story is really interesting. He had some buzz as a potential mid-round prospect, but then he had a heart condition at the combine, I believe, or not a heart condition, I believe, but some kind of condition at the combine that kind of ruined his stock and prevented him from testing. So he kind of fell completely out of the draft picture at all, and that's why he was eventually an undrafted signing free agent. I believe that Giants actually had him for a tryout based on the early reporting. But, Josh told me this guy is going to make your roster. He said, watch out. This guy's going to make your roster. He can play all the different positions, the X, the Y, the move tight end, the Y tight end. And he even said that, I read an interview where he even said, listen, NFL teams have told me they see me in all these different roles. And that's, I think, exactly what the Giants look for now when they're looking for these tight end prospects. They want guys who can do a number of different things within Shermer's scheme. So he's someone I keep an eye on, but obviously more to come on that later. But now that time of the show, Nick, let's get to the questions from the listeners. And we're going to start here with Giants J10, who asks, how does this secondary come together in 2019? What is the latest on Sam Beal?
Yeah, I think you got JJ. You got Jenkins as starting corner. I think you have Baker as the other starting corner. I think you got your free safety of Bethea, and you got your strong safety / hybrid / they'll do some fun stuff with Jabril Peppers. That's your 4. I think your nickel back is going to be a massive rotation if they move. They got to get Thomas on the field for their big nickel position. I think they're going to rotate in Love occasionally down the line. And I think that you're going to see Beal play some there and then have Love play on the outside as well and basically mix all that in. I guess you look at the wild card, like what does that say about Haley? I think he's got to prove it. When you rewatch his tape, I think he definitely gets the ball on the ground in terms of tackling, and he's got a lot going for him. But I think he's got to improve his play strength. He's got to get his upper body bigger. That could have changed right now. So that's super important. And I think him and Chandler's somewhat the same, but Chandler, I think Chandler has the better shot of making the team or getting more snaps in a more solidified role.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, Nick, because you look at a guy like Haley, and I wouldn't bet against him. I mean, undrafted free agent, everyone told him he was too small to play, made the team, and then once he made the team, was productive. I mean, it's really impressive to me. So it's tough to bet against a guy like that or any of these guys. Chandler, another guy with an awesome story, made the team and looked pretty solid, honestly, when he was on the field for limited snaps. But it is getting crowded in the secondary, and you look at, Beal's going to make this roster unless the injury is just worse than we expect and he didn't recover in time. Baker's going to make this roster. Jenkins is going to make this roster. I know some people thought he might get traded. That was never going to happen. Just cap-wise, this is going to be his last year here, and it all makes sense. Love's not going to get cut. Love's not going to make the team. And I think Valentine's going to make this team too. I really do. I think especially after what happened, I think just there's a lot of positive buzz. The Giants really want a player like him to help bring this team along and be that guy, maybe a glue piece later down the line in the secondary. So even from just a locker room standpoint, and I know he has, people rave about him off the field, and he, the things he did to make the NFL to Washburn is not easy. And get that invite to the Senior Bowl and then show up is even better. So it's a crowded secondary, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes there. There's no latest from me on Beal. I mean, he's supposed to be fully healthy and ready to go for the start of OTAs, and he'll have to prove himself. There's competition he probably didn't expect to have in the secondary, and it's not going to be easy. I think a lot of it depends on how fast, how quickly Baker comes along. Because if Baker immediately shows them what they think they need to see to be that island guy, he's not going to come off the field. I know that. I mean, he was unbelievably productive at Georgia back-to-back seasons in 2017, 2018. Even in 2016, he was really strong, but not nearly as dominant, but a strong player. So if they see, they obviously drafted him because they see that, the Giants, in addition to him obviously being a good fit based on the scheme and what he played at Georgia. But if he progresses faster than expected or as fast as they expect maybe, it's going to be tough for these other guys to get snapped because part of them getting on the field is Baker not being on the field for 100% of the snaps, because Janoris Jenkins is going to be on the field every snap. That's just how it goes. Jabril Peppers is going to be on the field every snap. And I think in year one, Nick, Antoine Bethea is going to be on the field almost every snap as well. He was on the field almost every snap last year for the Cardinals. So it'll be interesting to see early on, but I think competition, like we've said before, it seems like a situation where, okay, why would we not just draft X amount of offensive tackles, X amount of cornerbacks, X amount of linebackers, because that makes sense strategically roster-wise. But I think competition actually could lead to a better outcome. And me and Nick have always talked about this, that you have to kind of take that step back, that 30,000-foot view, and recognize that, it's not always about just going need by need by need. And sometimes the competition and putting a lot of talent together brings out the best in the few individuals who will end up standing out there. Johnny Rosenstein asked, DJ briefly mentioned that he sees a future free safety in fourth rounder Julian Love. Says, how did his tools translate from cornerback to free safety at the NFL level?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit, but basically where I see it is the way the Giants see safeties versus maybe others. Most guys, when they look for free safeties, they want guys that when the ball's released, they get a jump on the ball. I think that's basically like the baseline trait for a free safety. To be frank, Love doesn't do that well. He plays in off coverage a lot, and his plant and drive and his twitch, his grades for me there are not that great. However, the way the Giants see the world, because they had a starting free safety who was not in Curtis Riley, that was not his strong. They're what the Giants seem to focus on, based on the profile of him and a little bit of the profile of Love, is a guy with high FBI, a guy who can get guys lined up, and a guy who can adjust, because they've got a ton of checks in this defense and they do a ton of different things in coverage. So the guy's got to be enough of a jackknife. They want him to move around the formation. So I like Love there. I like Love coming back after listeners have asked these good questions. I watched 2 games this morning. I'm seeing him through a little different lens now. Yeah, he is a little versatile than when I first looked. The biggest thing that I would say that the Giants like is they like his blitzability, and that's also what Curtis Riley's strength was. So seeing some overlap there, you could hate Curtis Riley, you could love Riley, but he was the best blitzer outside of Collins on that defensive field. So he checks those 2 boxes, and I think that, again, the priority is for Betcher, I think, is that if you're going to have a free safety, he's just good enough at free safety, and if you can do those other things very, very well, then you have a winner, especially if you complement him with a guy like Bethea, who I think is an excellent free safety, especially at his career. He still can do that for you. So I think you have a bit of a win here to give Love, 18 to 24 months to see if he can do that.
Yeah, I love that, Nick. And listen, the common theme I hear in your breakdowns and just looking at this team and the way it's been constructed in the secondary is versatility and the ability to be a jackknife, different roles on that defense. That's what they're looking for in the secondary. I believe that. And I think they've gotten that at this point. So I think, Love could definitely fit into that. Jason Torrance asked, do you think that Dave Gettleman had it in his mind that he had to draft a quarterback this year? Last year and next year's classes are far superior. This is his opinion. He says, okay, he hopes he's wrong, but he feels like Gettleman forced it. Where do you stand on that, Nick?
I think he thought that he had to. I think everyone thinks that not everyone. I think that he's going to say he's going to draft because of need, right? Or not, sorry, so let me back up. Gettleman has always claimed you can't force it, right? You got to let things come to you. And that, but I think he absolutely had in his mind the way he went on visits, the way he viewed the quarterback class. It was very clear that they were looking at it very, very closely. Now being the second year in a row that they have done that, I don't think they could. I think they're at the point in time, even though they've been giving a longer runway than most front offices and coaching combinations. I think they know that they couldn't have another 4-11 or 4-12 or 5-11 season and quarterback yet, and still think that jobs in the third year. It's just the reality of the world. Even though the Giants are different, they don't fire people. I get it. That's just the way it goes. You kind of have to want to pull the trigger. And I think that there were 2. I think they saw options here that they liked, and they obviously saw one that they really, really liked. So I definitely think that that was their mindset. It was to get something done here. I think the other side of it too, again, I think the more time people spend away thinking maybe about the Giants offense and Eli Manning, the more they realize it's absolutely amazing that he's still playing. Forget if he's playing well, badly, good or not. It's just he's that old. And so it's just the way it goes. The only 2 other guys that have done this at a high level are arguably 2 of the best quarterbacks of all time. So I think that reality sets in, and you can't just ignore it And especially like I said, pre-draft, if you're not going to sign anyone in free agent as a free agent, you have to improve your quarterback room. You do year over year. You do. It's just the way it works. And whether that would be a starter or not, then that's what the Giants did.
Yeah, I agree with Nick for the most part here, Jason. I think that, listen, Gettleman, and no one's given him credit for this before. I mean, I've maybe seen it mentioned once, but I wrote about this on Sunday, and I'll give him credit for it again. I give him credit for, having this conviction on Jones and making the pick, because he knows at this point that his job security is tied to Daniel Jones and his development. Because if he had kicked the can down the road to 2020, which he could have done, he could have easily sold the fan base on drafting Josh Allen and rolling forward. At 17, maybe they trade back, maybe they draft Cody Ford. Who knows what they do there? And it changes a little bit, or they draft, or even if they draft Lawrence there, and then they draft Cajuste or Bobby Evans instead of the X-Men and round three. They could have sold the fan base on that easily, kicked the can down the road, and that would have bought him a full extra year of job security, because that's just how it is. His clock gets started the minute they draft a quarterback. And so I give him credit for that. And I don't think that in his mind, I think in his mind he did feel like he had to get a quarterback this year, but I don't hate him for that, because I thought he should have got a quarterback last year. And I thought he should have got a quarterback this year as well. I may not agree with the quarterback he did decide on, but I wasn't, and as you guys know from listening to this podcast, I wasn't really sold on any quarterback in this class except for Kyler Murray. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, I think that quarterbacks are the hardest position to predict, hardest position to predict translation, and I think there's a lot of times a lot of us are wrong. So I don't think I would not be, I won't make any definitive statement. If you tell me, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example like that makes sense in another. Okay, fine. If you tell me X-Men should have been drafted ahead of Josh Allen, well, I can tell you that there with confidence that I think that's a bad opinion. But if you tell me anything on the quarterbacks, I really just don't know if I could say with a definitive understanding that there's a right or wrong at that position as far as evaluation goes on who's good and who's bad. And I don't know where you stand on that, Nick, but we can talk about that off air. But I think that's really a fair point at the quarterback position. I think it's very hard to confidently predict. Now, having said all that, why do I think it was so important to him to draft a quarterback this year or last year? It's because you have to get the ball rolling. We've talked about this before on multiple podcasts throughout the year. The Giants need to upgrade that quarterback position if they want to upgrade the ceiling of this team. It's as simple as that. I mean, you can disagree with me, and that's totally fair, but I don't think that Eli Manning has a Super Bowl ceiling left in him. Some people will still tell you to this day that the Giants could win a Super Bowl with Eli Manning. I'm not so sure. I'm sure I'm not there anymore. So you get the process started a little bit earlier instead of waiting for 2020. And then at the same time, you give the chance of hitting on that that rookie quarterback on his rookie deal while Saquon Barkley is still on his rookie deal, and while you have 10 plus 5, 15 draft picks total from the last two classes who will be on their rookie deals, a lot of UDFAs who made the team last year who are expected to come over this year. So you have that young core to go along with that rookie quarterback, with that quarterback on a rookie deal. And that's really the plan. And I think it's been proven to work at the NFL level. Now, obviously, it all comes down to if Daniel Jones can translate to the next level and be the quarterback who you need him to be on that rookie deal. But I think from that standpoint, he didn't force it. He found the guy he loved, and he understood that, you need it. And, he understood that you needed to take one. So if you ask me if I think that Dave Gettleman, in all seriousness, Nick, believes what he said, that he had Daniel Jones rated from a value standpoint the same as Josh Allen on his board, I don't think so. I just don't think so. I know I've seen some of you get mad at me, by the way, on Twitter for this, for not taking Gettleman at his word. I'm sorry. I'm not the type of person. I'm not going to come on here. If you want to hear that from somebody else, you can find it on Giants Twitter. Trust me. There's a lot of people who will be positive only about this team. But I don't believe coach speak, and I don't believe GM speak. I just don't. I don't take it at face value. I think it's there for a reason. So if you ask me if it's a value pick, I'm going to tell you no. But I do think that it is okay to stretch a little bit for need at quarterback because it's such an important position, and it was so important for this franchise. Moving on, though, Andrew Jones asked, if Daniel Jones turns out to be a Hall of Famer, does Dave Gettleman deserve credit, Nick, or was he just lucky?
Number one, he definitely deserves credit. Number two, where this message or this question I think is kind of coming from is, if he had talked about the ball elements that he liked about Jones, it may be a little clearer. Instead, you don't really have a window into that process. I can give you what my analysis is, what I think they liked in him, and what they value higher than other teams, and that's fine, right? But he absolutely will get that. Will get tied to that. I think the one thing, first of all, he obviously will get credit, but I think the one thing that is just lost a little bit in the sauce through all this is that these players are not static chess pieces, and the key is projection and going forward. And part of that projection, which is really interesting when you pick the player, is you have an influence over his development, which is not the case if you want to like equate it to stock picking or any other like elements where you're just basically a passive person taking the ride on this random walk. So on the Jones side of it, this speaks not only quite highly to where they think Jones is now. This speaks insanely highly to where they think they can develop guys, how they think they can help them get better. Now that it's hard to debate that because that's their belief, and the proof will be in the pudding if those individual traits change. That's what guys look at. Results necessarily, we weight some of that, but more so, are we going to see improvements to stuff that guys like me have identified? And I think you can. And I think it's gonna be a great study in that. To be totally frank, I'm very excited to see like how he does that. He being Shermer and Shula and everyone else who's gonna be involved in this, his private coaches, all types of guys. So I think that's a part of it too, and that's what Gettleman's buying into, and he's putting his chips on the table that way. So it doesn't necessarily mean like if I've been asked the question a little bit too, just to kind of go another way. It's like, if all the other players that they could have drafted, they end up better than Jones, does that mean Jones is a bad pick? It's like, honestly, I don't think you can view it that way. The decision they made is the decision they made because what they know at that point in time, that's what you evaluate. And then you see if your projection gets there. If you miss on the projection, then it's a bad decision. Not if the guys that you miss become great, because once they're picked on other teams, they become different players. They evaluate. Guys get evaluated every year. So it's not that it's just like, hey, is it solely because of who he is now? So that's what I'm psyched to see. I don't know if he'll get there. I don't think anyone really knows. And it'll be a good thing to follow.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Andrew, if he's right about Jones, I don't think it's luck at all. That's just my personal opinion. I think that the Giants are prioritizing different things at the quarterback position than the majority of people who evaluated this class, the majority of people who I respect who evaluated this class, myself, Nick, even people like us who evaluated this quarterback class, they're looking for different things. Like Nick said, they're looking for different things that from a physical standpoint, from a trade standpoint, for sure, that they believe can develop in Shermer's specific offensive scheme. That is no doubt. That's without a doubt. Nick brought that up, and that's for sure. But it's also the mental stuff. And I believe that they view, and it will remain to be seen if this was a good thing to weigh so heavily, but they view his character, his leadership, his ability to take criticism and throw an interception and come back right out there. And most importantly, which hasn't been talked about enough, his toughness. I'm watching a lot of Daniel Jones lately. You can say a lot about him. You can't say he's not tough. I think he's the toughest quarterback I've watched in this draft class. I really do. I haven't seen a quarterback hit as much as him right before he throws the football as Daniel Jones. I haven't seen a quarterback do what he does, especially early in his tape. Like you look at the 2016, 2017, which I started to look a little bit more into, Nick. He's just running into guys to get first downs when he takes off, and he doesn't care. He's a tough guy. And when he runs the zone read, and he ran it a lot more earlier, he's just going for it. He's not worried about it. So they like that toughness in him, and they like a lot of the little things that have actually impressed me a little bit more when I've looked at Nick. I went back and I watched Jones a game from Jones from the 2016 season. His first season as a redshirt freshman, first season where you're in the starting role. And he had to go into South Bend to Notre Dame, a team that, one year or another doesn't really matter where they're ranked, in my opinion, because they play such a cupcake schedule, in my opinion, that it's just like they go undefeated, they get into the playoff or something like that. But no matter what you say about Notre Dame on a season-to-season basis, they're getting really good recruits year after year after year. They have really good coaching. They have a really good infrastructure, and they have a lot of talent. So they have a lot of talent that's going to be on the field every game. And that 2016 Duke team was not talented at all. It was a terrible team. And he went into South Bend, a really tough place to play on the road, and he single-handedly won that game. I watched that whole game. He is the reason Duke won that game. There is no other reason. He ran for over 100. I'm pretty sure he ran for over 100, or maybe I might be misreporting that, but he won that game with individual plays, and he had a fourth quarter game winning drive as well to add into that. So it's those little things that really are important for the Giants. And that could be considered subjective by some teams. Okay, he has a big win here. Or what about this guy who has a big win there? Dwayne Haskins goes into Michigan or goes in the Big Ten championship, wins the game, wins the Rose Bowl, those type of things. So I believe that can be subjective, but I believe that is valued really highly by Gettleman and his staff. And if it works, and if those things ended up being the difference in Jones becoming a player that no one really saw on film, or not no one, but most people evaluated to be more of a mid-round guy on film, then yeah, he deserves credit for that, at least according to me.
The other side of it too, just to enhance Dan's point a little bit here, and I'm seeing a little bit of a theme as I run through these guys, and literally we're doing this on the podcast. We don't really rehearse much of this beforehand. Daniel Jones, if you listen to the 360 series done by Daniel Jeremiah and the guys and Bucky Brooks, Daniel Jones set his mind to go to Duke, wanted to go to Duke because of Cutcliffe, was recruited by very few people, and to be honest, wouldn't have been at here if his high school coach hadn't called basically Cutcliffe and said, please look at him again. No one's recruiting him. And Cutcliffe said, please just don't call anyone else. And literally went there like within 3 days. So Jones is a guy who set his mind to something. He's incredibly competitive to it. And basically he could have been a basketball player, I believe. It's basketball. Yeah. He chose this path. You go down the line, Dexter Lawrence, you hear all those guys at Clemson talk. They talked about being a team. They talked about being together. Dabo Swinney built a family down there. That's who Dexter Lawrence is. Go down the line. Go down to Love. Love is a really interesting story. He's an Indiana kid. All he wanted to do was play at Notre Dame. He committed on the phone to Notre Dame when they initially made the offer. It was like he didn't want to go anywhere else. It was Notre Dame or bust. I think they identified that. Then you look at Ox. Ox is an engineering guy. He's an engineering major. He gets all these offers within the Virginia, North Carolina area, all the side ODU for engineering. And literally ODU is, like I said, he's the first player drafted from ODU, right? They're a 10-year-old program in football. All I'm seeing a theme here of guys, when they set their minds on things, they follow through. I do think that's a big part of it. Psych evals that go in, spend a shit ton of time at the Senior Bowl and Combine going through. So yeah, whether we disagree or agree, it's not always just the tape. I would say that's especially true at the quarterback position. And yeah, I do see a little bit of a theme there. And I think that if you, and again, that's not just to keep on pumping it, but if people listen to the 360 series they will have a little different opinion of him. He's not that similar to Eli Manning in terms of his mannerisms and in terms of his, I will say this, in terms of his competitiveness and being kind of an underdog for sure.
Yeah, and I do think that there's no real benefit for me or Nick to bump this, but so I'm not going to go too crazy about it. But make sure you do yourself a favor and listen to the Daniel Jones 360 series it's on the Move the Six podcast with Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah. It's an unbelievable pod. It's about an hour and 10 minutes long. I listened to it the other day. It touches on his old coaches, his family. You get a feel for how his sisters and his parents feel about him, some of the things that he went through growing up. And I would agree with Nick. He's not as similar to Eli Manning as people are making out to be. I think he has a little bit more competitive fire. It's not competitive fire. Eli Manning's a super competitive player. He just doesn't show it. But I think he has a little more, and it's not rah-rah because that's not Jones, that's not Manning. But I just think that he has a little more overall athleticism, less coached, I guess not coached athleticism, but I think he's just overall more of an athlete than Eli, and I think it'll show, and in his competitive nature as well. I think it'll show up. So we'll see there. Adam Jones asks, he's got a few questions actually, and we'll wrap the show up with these. His first one is, out of all the DBs who were drafted, can you see the Giants trying out any at free safety in any of the camps? So actually, we'll pass on this one, Adam, just because we've touched on this a bunch so far in this podcast. A lot of people are interested in this. But he asked another one, and he says, what do you think is the ceiling for Big George on the offensive line?
Big George. Who's that?
Sorry, George Asafo. So he was nicknamed Big George at Kentucky.
That's how much work I did on him. I had no idea who he was.
Yeah. He was a master. They gave him that nickname.
Got it. I'm not going to punt on this one. I will come back with an answer, but I don't have the answer now, and I will not bullshit you.
Totally fair. That's what I said. We got to look into it. As far as from what I've heard, like I said, I talked a little bit about him earlier. From talking with my Kentucky guy at 24/7 Sports, sees him as more of an offensive guard fit, but he says he wouldn't bet against him based on some of the things he's done at the collegiate level and who the person he is. So last question for today, Nick, and it's going to be a little bit of a different one, shifting focus away from the draft. Adam also wants to know, do you see free agent Shane Ray, as a potential fit for Betcher's specific scheme? Have you taken a look at him at all, Nick?
No, I haven't, but let's just do a little live scouting. I'm hold on one second. No, I haven't, but I know he's an athletic. His athleticism strong, but I can look into him, and I didn't realize he was in the mix.
Yeah, so he's
I
one of
will,
the guys that's kind of been rumored somewhat to potentially be in the mix for the Giants. You know, if they're going to sign one extra linebacker to compete here on the outside, he's been mentioned. There's a few others who've kind of been in. He's kind of one of the more higher upside guys, former top round pick, but just coming off his rookie deal, so he's still young. Showed a lot at the SEC level, and when he was coming into the NFL, but hasn't exactly lived up to the hype. There's concern. Some people think it's because he played out of scheme in Denver. So we'll get back to you on that one as well too, Adam, because we'll see what happens there. I wouldn't be so sure the Giants are going to bring in another big time outside linebacker here after drafting X-Men. I think that they kind of want to keep that rotation a little smaller there, because they do also view Kareem Martin as that outside linebacker role as somebody who can set the edge in the run game, and they obviously have a good feeling about having him on the field in general, because he was on the field a lot for them. And he's under contract for a pretty hefty sum. So they have kind of 4 guys already in place there. If you look at it like that,
yeah.
Martin, X-Men, and then Lorenzo Carter. So adding a 5th guy there, it does, especially a big name like Ray, who, he's not going to sign a 1-year prove it to not play. He's going to sign a 1-year prove it he's only going to sign with the Giants so they can guarantee him a specific role on the defense and a high snap count. And do the Giants have a high snap count right now to hand out at outside linebacker? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see, but it's an interesting question, because he's definitely the most talented and kind of high upside based on the fact that he's still coming off that rookie deal and was a former top pick on the free agent market. But on that note, guys, we're going to sign off for today. Stick with us. We're going to be breaking down Giants football throughout the offseason. We're going to have a deeper look at the rest of these guys that we haven't touched on in depth film wise. The back end of this class, the undrafted free agents, mini camp talk. And I think at some point, I talked about the Nick off air, we're going to try to do just a breakdown of the overall roster construction and where we see strengths and weaknesses on this team as they head into camp and as they prepare moving forward. As always, guys, if you do enjoy the podcast, please do your best to help us grow this. Honestly, it's up to you guys, too, to help us out here. And I would love if you guys would step in for us, because it would make our jobs a lot easier. The best way to do that is just simple. Just subscribe on iTunes, download each podcast on iTunes, which they judge on, and give us a rating there. And then just spread the word to your friends if you like it, because the more listeners we get and the bigger we grow this thing, the more resources and tools we'll have to do more interesting stuff on this podcast. As always, if you want to follow along with us on Twitter and see some of our work, you can follow me at Dan Schneier NFL on Twitter. That's DANSCHNEIER NFL. Obviously, I'm pretty active on there, so I will get to any questions there that I missed today. You can follow my work as well on the CBS Sports app. Hit that on your phone. Click on the Giants as your big team, or just on 247sports.com/New York Giants, where all my work will go up. Nick, where can we find your work, and tell us where you can find you on Twitter?
Twitter handle TManic21. That's where I'm posting most of my things, from threads for everything we talked about, some film evidence for what we talked about this podcast, and really basically everything going forward.
Yep. All right, guys. On that note, we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, and go Giants.